Our two presenters for the evening, we have Neysa McKenney and Paula Papp. Neysa is a speech language pathologist and has worked with Connecting for Kids for a while now, doing some of our what are the programs that you do with us? I can't, it's been so long. Yeah, teach me to play. Thank you. Where did my brain go? And Paula Papp, who's an early intervention specialist and also does our Teach Me to Play programs. So ladies, you can take it away.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're glad to be here today presenting some information that might help you with your child's behavior. Your toolbox is designed to avoid and diffuse tantrums and meltdowns. In a perfect world, we'd love to avoid those tantrums and meltdowns, but we don't live in the perfect world. So we want to provide some information for you in the event that tantrums and meltdowns are part of your life, which I'm sure they are. Give you some information and some tactics and some strategies of things that you can do to diffuse and soften those tantrums and meltdowns. Your toolbox is also designed to provide some visual aids to support communication and better understanding of the day's events. So it's twofold. The visual aids will help your child express himself a little bit more and will help your child understand what is expected of him throughout the day. The toolbox is designed to aid in co-regulation and self-regulation. We're going to talk a lot about that later, so just keep that in mind. There'll be some information on that. And the toolbox is designed to bring insight into the relationship between feelings, emotions, and behavior. As we go through this presentation, I really want you to think about how feelings and emotions drive behavior. All of our behavior is driven by feelings and emotions. That's a really key point as we proceed through here. So what's in your toolbox? So you guys will be getting a toolbox. As Nicole said, you'll be picking it up at the Porter Library.
We need to advance slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot about that.
Yeah,
Sarah, we're on page 3.
Or slide 3. There we go.
3. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks, Paula.
Sorry, you're welcome.
I was in the zone.
I know, really. I'm like, okay.
All right. What's in this toolbox? All right, everybody will be receiving these items. You will be receiving a first then board, a visual schedule board, a stop sign, a wait sign, a when I am angry poster, a sheet that talks about transition strategies for children, an all done sign, a handout on praising children, and a social story on how to calm my body. And we will be talking about each of these things individually as we move through the presentation. Next slide. There you go.
Hi, I'm Paula. We want to talk some about behavior, and to understand that behavior and actions are a form of communication. There are some differences and some commonalities between tantrums and meltdowns. So we're going to take a couple slides to look at that. What is a tantrum? It's an outburst when your kid's trying to get something that they want or that something they think they need. Tantrums are common for toddlers and preschoolers. That's why they call them the terrible twos. Children, when they're having a tantrum, do have some control over their behavior. And tantrums are likely to end when the child gets what they're seeking or realizing that this tantrum is really not working for them. So the question is, how can I tame a tantrum? So you can use some visual aids to support communication between your child and yourself. So again, that's why we've put this kit together. You want to acknowledge what your child wants without giving in. You can say, I see that you want more candy, so that you're acknowledging that you're understanding what it is they want. And also you want to state and model the desired behavior. In other words, I'm using my words to blah, 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 blah. so you can demonstrate those behaviors. And above all, you want to keep calm and carry on. Next slide. So as we said, behavior is a form of communication. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the little differences about a meltdown. First off, a meltdown is usually a reaction to being just totally overwhelmed by feelings or what's going on around you. The child just is not able to process what's going on. There's just too much going on, and it causes their bucket. And we talk about like just all these, you know, all the noise is pouring in and the visual is pouring in and everything moving around them is pouring in, and just finally their bucket just gets full and it just overflows. Now again, a meltdown is likely to end when a child is fatigued or you've somehow reduced the sensory input. So again, we can talk about how we can manage a meltdown. You can help your child find a safe, quiet place to de-escalate. You can use visual aids and calming strategies. Again, we're providing some of these visual aids in the kit. And calming strategies can be deep breathing, rocking, soothing music, etc. And you also want to do what you can to reduce the amount of sensory input coming in. Both with meltdowns and tantrums, when you are upset and in a state, you have difficult processing verbal communication. In other words, you know, somebody's saying something to you and you just really can't make sense of it because you're just not in the state to be able to comprehend. So we suggest using visual aids during meltdowns and tantrums. And also, if you are using some verbal directions, to use as few words as possible so it's easier for your child to process. Next slide.
So as Paula mentioned, sometimes using visual cues can help your child understand what is expected of him and therefore reduce the need for a tantrum or a meltdown, or at least calm it in its path. So what is a visual cue? It's anything that you can see that enhances what you as the adult are saying. So when we say words to children, that information is coming into our auditory channel, through our ears into our auditory channel. When we provide a visual cue, we're adding the visual channel to support the auditory channel. And those two channels are working together with more power to help the child understand and make sense of the situation. So what is a visual cue? It can be an object, such as a tub toy. So if it's time for bath time, you might take the tub toy with you to the bathtub as a visual reminder that this is where we're going. It could be a representational object again. It could be a gesture. So you could be using a point or a sign. It could be a photo. It could be a picture, a line drawing, or it could just be simply a word. If your child is old enough to understand printed material or is reading or writing, then sometimes you can just use text to support the information. And why do we use visual cues? Again, we want to support the auditory channel where the words come in and are processed with the visual channel by using the visual cues. Visual cues provide information in additional and supportive way. And children are familiar with using visual cues. Think about your child when you get your car keys out. They already know that they're already prepared to go for a ride in the car. Think about when you get their cup from the sink. They're thinking that they're going to get some milk or some juice or some water in that cup. Those are visual cues that you're providing to your child on a regular basis. What happens when you drive past McDonald's? Children recognize that McDonald's, it used to be the Arches and now it's a new McDonald's sign, but children recognize that that equals French fries and chicken nuggets. So kids are very in tune to visual cues already, whether they're objects or pictures or symbols, all of that. Visual cues can be easily individualized, and we're going to talk about that as we go through. And they're hard to argue with because they're permanent. They're lasting, they're permanent. They can be referred to throughout the activity, whereas the words that you might say to your child go in one ear and out the other. So the visual cues are there to support your words. Next slide, please.
Well, here is the first thing we want to show you that's in your kit that you'll be getting. This is the first then board. Next slide. The first then board is just basically what we need to do now, and then what do we need to do next. We can use the first then board as a way to introduce a visual schedule. If your child is in preschool or if your child is in a daycare center, chances are they have already experienced using a visual schedule. It's just a very common way or tactic that early childhood educators use. So again, we can think of the first then board as a mini schedule. Sometimes you can use a first then board at a more difficult time of the day or a more difficult transition. In other words, first you have to get dressed and then we can go outside. So on your first side of your first then board, you could have a picture of clothing, or if your child is not at that level of understanding symbols, you could have a sock. So in other words, first you've got to get on your clothes and then you get to go outside. And so then maybe you could have a picture of a tree or some outside scene. You can use the first then board to break down the larger schedule into some more manageable and understandable pieces, again, depending on how you're working your schedule with your child. And the first then board can be individualized using objects or photos or line drawings, whatever you think will work with your child. Next slide.
Okay, you're looking at a picture of a blank visual schedule. As Paula said, the first then board is a smaller version of this longer or more detailed visual schedule. This will also be in your toolbox. Next slide, please. And why would we use a visual schedule? Well, a visual schedule is a pictorial, illustrated representation of the sequence of events that are about to occur. So it can be, maybe it's the dressing routine, maybe it's the morning routine, maybe it's the going to bed routine, maybe it's the things we need to put in our backpack before we go off to school. Those things would be pictorially represented in each of those individual boxes as sort of a checklist or like a grocery list of sort of things that we need to do before we can get to the end of this particular part of our day. A visual schedule really does help reduce anxiety because children can look at that schedule and know exactly what they need to do in that next part of that routine. It can organize the day and break down the daily activities and routines into smaller increments. So you can do, like I said, the dressing routine, then maybe you do a mid-morning routine, and then you could do the quiet time routine or the nap routine. And as Paula said earlier, the visual schedule is something that a lot of the preschools and elementary schools are using right now so that kids understand what they're supposed to do, what time they're supposed to do it, and the order they're supposed to do it. So it's very organizing to children, and it does support the understanding of expectations. Because the visual schedule also has words, it can promote language and literacy learning. And again, it's tangible. So, you as a parent can say, okay, first we're going to get on our shoes and socks, and then we're going to get in the car, and then we're going to go to therapy. Well, that's a lot of words for some children. But if the visual schedule shows those pictures of socks, car, therapist, or therapy building, then your child has this, can create this idea in his head, this picture in his head of what's happening during that part of the routine. The visual schedule can also foster independence. For example, the steps to teeth brushing. So, you get your toothbrush out, you turn on the water, you put some toothpaste on it, you brush your teeth, you rinse your mouth, step-by-step guidance of how to brush your teeth, so that the parent doesn't have to stand there and tell them step-by-step what to do. The pictures are guiding that independence. The visual schedule can also help with easing transitions. Children know at the end of that set of pictures, something new is going to happen. And that's when you as the parent would switch out the pictures and go on to the next activity and sequence the pictures in the order that that next activity is going to occur. And also, when you make a visual schedule, a lot of times you can have several activities in a row, and then you can have the all done card. And we're going to talk about that later a couple of times. So the all done card then symbolizes this part of our day is over. We're going to move on to something new. So we'll talk about that later. The visual schedule can help us learn patience and persistence because it guides us through the activity one little baby step at a time. Instead of thinking about, oh my gosh, I have to put on all of my clothing this morning. I'm never going to be able to do that by myself. It breaks it down into first we put on our underpants or our diaper. Well, not diaper. Then we put on our shirt, then we put on our pants, our socks, and our shoes. And it's very systematic and very piece by piece. So it's little baby steps to getting the whole picture completed. And the visual schedule also lessens the opportunities for arguments or negotiation. Again, it's permanent. The child can use it as a guide, and you can't argue with pictures. And you expect the child to become somewhat independent by using it. So you may be stepping out of the room while they're independently using their visual schedule to get through that routine. Okay. All right, next slide. So when you're setting up a visual schedule with your child, there's a number of things that you want to think about. First of all, you want to think about your child's ability to understand visual information. What level of visual cue do you need to use with your child? Does it need to be an object? If that's the case, then you would find representational objects to use to put in those boxes that would represent, again, getting dressed or brushing your teeth or putting items in your book bag to get ready to go to the bus stop, things like that. It can be pictures, it can be words, and we talked about that earlier. So know your child's level of understanding of visual information and use that level to your advantage when you create the visual schedule. When you set up the visual schedule, you want to think about the parts of the day. What needs to get done? So again, you can divide it into small units. Each routine can have its own visual schedule, and you just change out the pictures for the next routine. Or it could be for a particularly difficult part of the routine. Transitioning from the playground to the car to go home and have dinner can be a little mini schedule board. So you're giving your child the visuals of, yes, we are going to leave the playground, but you're also showing them that here's what's next, because children sometimes hate to leave what they're currently doing because they don't know what is coming up and whether they're going to like it or not. So if, we're leaving the playground to get in the car to go home and eat dinner, those things might be positive for the child and might help you get your child out of the playground. The visual schedule, you might want to put the printed word under each picture. And generally speaking, Paula and I would advocate that you do put the printed word under the picture on the schedule, because we're always very surprised about how young children are picking up literacy, letters, formation of words. So you're basically just encouraging your child to learn to do some reading when you do put that printed word under the pictures. Think about when you make your visual schedule, what materials do you have access to? Do you have access to the internet, to Google Images? Do you have access to a printer? Are you an artist? Can you draw your own pictures? I have a couple of moms who have drawn some of their own pictures on the visual schedule, and it's amazing. Do you like to take pictures with your camera? If so, you can take pictures of your child moving through his routine and use those as you create your visual schedule. The setup of the schedule, it can be left to right, as in the example that you're going to get in your toolkit. It can be top to bottom. There's a variety of ways to set up your schedule, and that would be just something that you would create to your liking. And the visual schedule, just keep in mind your child's needs and abilities. Some children can look at a 5 or 6 step visual schedule and understand what is expected of them. And other kids need to have it broken down into more like a first bend board, where there's maybe only 2 or 3 spaces. Okay. Oh, I just looked at my note. It says, for more information on how to set up a visual schedule, you can find that at our Connecting for Kids website. We did a presentation on visual schedules, and so there's lots of good information on the website for you when you set up your visual schedule. Okay, next slide.
So in your kit, you're also going to find this cute little stop sign. And this can be a visual cue to help you manage behavior and teach safety. So you're going to teach your child how to stop and wait for an adult when the sign is posted. So you could post this sign by your front door to teach your child not to go out the door, possibly post a stop sign on your office door to say, stay out of my office. But again, you can teach your child how to use the stop sign. We also might want to use the manual sign or the sign language. This is stop, sign, and that too you can use as a visual cue for stopping. You can use the stop sign to remind your child not to interrupt. If you're on the phone, that's a good example. For older children, it's nice to teach your child to stop and think. Many children are very impulsive, and learning that behavior of let me stop for a minute and think about what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do can certainly be invaluable. Next slide. This little wait sign is also in your kit. Waiting, why is that important? Waiting is a necessary safety skill. I don't think we need to talk much about that. We certainly understand it. Learning to wait can also help with impulse control. And we talked already a little bit about that, but practicing waiting can also help your child think more about what they're saying and what they're going to do. And the fact of the matter is, waiting is something that all of us have to do. I know a lot of us are going to be waiting in lines, possibly to get vaccines. We're going to have to learn a lot about waiting. Next slide. Learning to wait is not easy for any of us. How long your child can wait depends on how often they get to practice, what their sensory needs are, and of course, their level of understanding. Right around toddler age, 18 months or so, kids can start to understand and practice waiting. Adults, throughout the day, throughout routines, throughout activities, can model and point out instances of waiting. Oh, look, we're waiting in our car, you're driving along, we're waiting for the light to turn green. So you can point out those instances throughout your day when you are waiting. You teach your child what to do while they're waiting. So, maybe humming or singing a song. Things like you're waiting maybe in a line with your child. The hand squeeze game where you squeeze their hand gently one time and they squeeze back. And then you squeeze 3 times and they squeeze back 3 times. But there's all kinds of things that you can do to teach your child to stay calm and engaged while waiting. Maybe retelling something that happened yesterday, or retelling a favorite story. Again, thinking about how to stay calm and engaged while waiting. You want to start short. As you begin to practice waiting with your child, you're going to start having them wait just a few seconds and then build on that as you go on. And I talked already about practicing throughout the daily routines and activities. For example, let's wait for a minute for your next cookie. We're waiting. And then give them the cookie or another food item or another block. And then cut back on screen time. And we have this listed because there is this immediate gratification with screen time. And it's funny because when you go to click on something, like I turn on my computer and it doesn't come on instantly, I immediately have this little bit of agitation almost. This is a hard time, I know, with all the restrictions because of COVID, but just kind of tuck this in the back of your head that when you can think about cutting back on screen time, that might help your child become less used to this immediate gratification. Next slide.
Okay, regulating. What is regulating? Or regulation, sometimes you might hear it used that way. Regulating is gaining, regaining, and maintaining a calm, alert state. So right now, most of us are regulated. We're listening, maybe we're calm, maybe we're bouncing on a therapy ball to keep us calm. Maybe we went to get something soothing to drink. Maybe we're fidgeting with a fidget toy. Maybe we're rocking back and forth like I was just doing a little bit of swaying. I'm petting my dog right now. So I am trying to maintain regulation as we talk through this program today. But what is regulation? It's the ability to consciously control your actions and your behaviors, your emotions and your feelings. And remember, those two things are very, very intertwined. Your emotions and feelings drive your actions and your behaviors. So let's look at how do we we need to become aware of our body's internal state. So our feelings and our emotions come from within our body, the internal state. And those things are hunger and thirst, the sense of feeling full, the sense of being comfortable, the feeling of being itchy, feeling hurt or sick, the feeling of needing to use the bathroom or being constipated, your emotions and your feelings. So you're sad or happy or silly or tired or giddy or all the other emotions, angry. And also your sensory processing. So how much movement can you tolerate? How much touch can you tolerate? How much taste? What kind of taste sensations do you enjoy? All of those things play into our internal state. And our internal state then affects how we feel and how we behave. So if you have a child who's constipated, you're going to know that that child is not going to be in a good mood until he is able to unconstipate himself. We all know children who are uncomfortable in their own clothing because the tags are itchy or the seams are bumpy or the material is scratchy. We all get the hangries. We know what that's like when we need to eat something and we get a feeling of I don't know what the word is, but we just get this feeling of not being able to cope because we're hungry and all we can think about is food. As you're thinking about regulation, I want you to consider some information from Mary Sue Williams and Sherry Schellenberger, who are OTs. They have an analogy that they use. How does your engine run? So you want to think about your body as like a car engine. Sometimes it runs on high, so it's moving fast. Sometimes it runs slow, so it's kind of low and calm and slow. And sometimes it runs just right. So think about, all of these speeds are appropriate in our bodies at certain times of the day. So what you want to happen is, for example, we want our engines to run slowly at bedtime. So we don't want to be going into bedtime with all of this extra energy. And we need to have some calming strategies to keep ourselves calm at bedtime. We want our engines to run just right when it's time for school or when it's time to sit and listen to a podcast or a presentation like this. And we want our bodies to run faster, our engine to run faster when we're on the playground, when we need to, use all that energy to get up onto the playground equipment and chase our friends around. So we need to, our engine needs to run at different speeds throughout different parts of our day. The regulation part is helping our body get to the right speed so that we can focus and maintain attention during that activity. So we could have a whole talk on regulation. Basically, there's lots of information out there on regulation, and I encourage you to seek it out because it does help us understand why children sometimes behave the way they do. Next slide, please.
Well, we want to call this co-regulation. In other words, this is when you're helping your child maintain this calm, alert state. And children need our help because they may not be able to identify or label or manage their emotions. So we can say, I see you're feeling angry. I see that you are frustrated. And then helping them to know what to do about that. Not being aware of the resources they have available. Children might not know all the different things that you have available to them so that they can regulate themselves. So we can provide a bin of maybe fidget toys or an area where your child knows that they can go to and find the trampoline or find a ball to bounce on to help them regulate. Again, you can also have a menu or a visual representation of all the different things available to your child to help them regulate. They don't necessarily know what resource or what tool to use and when to use it. So we need to be there to say to them, okay, maybe try this fidget toy now, or let's go bounce on the trampoline. They may not know how to use these resources effectively. So jumping up on the trampoline and jumping 2 times and jumping off is not going to be probably that effective. So we need to be there with them to support, okay, let's jump 10 times. Mommy's going to count with you. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. as they're jumping, so that they're using that trampoline or that resource effectively. And again, children may not be able to access all the resources. So we need to make sure that we've got our resources organized in a way that we can easily access them and that our children can learn to easily access them. I talked about the toolkit at the beginning of the presentation, there's a little picture of the toolkit. And I said to Neysa, it's like, oh, I wish I could have found a toolkit that had a picture of a more organized toolkit. So you want your toolkit or your resources for your child to be as organized as they can be so that they're easily accessible and used. Next slide. This is another tool that will be in your toolkit. This is the When I Am Angry. And I called it a poster. So again, this is just sort of an idea of something you can post at your home that says, like, when your child is angry, here are some things that they can do in order to move away from that anger and become more regulated. And some of the examples are blowing, hugging a toy, a favorite spinny toy, squeezing a squishy toy, sitting in a beanbag, blowing bubbles, listening to music, etc. Again, this is just one of the tools that will be in your toolbox. Next slide. A visual aid like the one we just looked at can be posted where it's accessible to children and adults. You want it handy so that you can refer to it. It can be individualized depending on what strategies work best. We're just giving you an example. You might know that there are some other things that your child does, like maybe rocking in the rocking chair is very calming for them when they get angry. So you would want to individualize it with a picture of a rocking chair. Provide information to others to support consistency. If this is posted at your house that says, okay, here are some things that may work when Johnny gets angry, then we can kind of consistently, your spouse or the grandmother or other caretakers, older children, we can be supportive and consistent. And again, you can make these for other different kinds of feelings and emotions. When I'm sad, here are some things I can do. When I'm frustrated, here are some things I can do. So you can use this idea of this visual aid to meet the needs of a variety of feelings and emotions. Next slide.
Okay, the topic of transitions. We all know that transitions are difficult for children. Moving out of something that's familiar to move to something that's less familiar or maybe not as well known, or, oh, what's going to happen next? I'm not sure, is difficult and anxiety producing for children. So transitions are just basically that, moving between activities, getting from this to that, or moving from one location to another. And that location can be within the house or outside of the house, or from the house to the therapy room, or the therapy room to school, or whatever the locations are. So it's important that we prepare our children for transitions, because transitions are one of those places where we are going to notice some behaviors, because children do not want to move from what they're currently doing, usually, to what you want them to do. So cleaning up the blocks to go take a bath. Well, I don't want to clean up my blocks, so I'm going to have a temper tantrum. Even though I like my bath, it's that transition, that closing up one activity and moving to the other one that's difficult. So we want to prepare our kids for these transitions. So you can, again, use your visuals, your pictures, your objects. You can use songs. You can, show your child what's coming up next. You can chant, 1 more minute to play. And I would advise you to go on YouTube. There are a zillion transition songs and chants on YouTube. Some of them are very specific to an activity about cleaning up, like the famous Barney song. And some are just nice little chants that you can plug in your own words to and use them within your own routines for your own child. When you do have a transition coming up, you want to define the time before the transition. Give your child time to think about ending the current activity and moving on to the next activity. Children's brains don't work as quickly as our adult brains, and they need lots of time to process the words you're saying, what those words mean, what that means for them, what cleanup is going to look like, and what's coming up next. So you can say something like 3 more turns and then we're finished. 1 more time down the slide and then we're going to go in the house. 5 more blocks on your block power and then we're going to clean up. So give them something concrete to think about as to help them define the time before the activity actually is complete. Because we know that transitions cause some meltdowns and some behavior outbursts, it's important to offer some sensory breaks. So as you're transitioning from, let's say you're transitioning from the car to the therapy room, a lot of times my kids will come into the waiting room and be in a tizzy. It's important for the kids to have some time to calm down, maybe go back into the motor area and jump on the trampoline, maybe crawl through the tunnel, go down the slide, and then we move into the therapy room. So I'm giving them some time, a sensory break so that they can kind of get their head in the game and be ready for therapy. So we're not rushing them right into, the therapy room to do some work. Don't be afraid to move on playfully. You can certainly stomp like a dinosaur to the next activity. You can dance to the next activity. You can sing your way to the next activity. Do whatever you have to do, to get there peacefully. And don't forget to get out your all done sign. That will be in your toolkit. You can use the all done sign. Again, you slide that all done sign into the, onto the floor where you're playing to give the child a cue that, hey, pretty soon we're going to be all done. Okay. And there's going to be more information on transitions in your toolkit. There's a whole sheet of information in there on transitions and how to help make those more smoothly. Next slide. Okay, the all done sign is used to signal the completion of an activity. I think we pretty much have talked about that. To prepare for closure of the current activity and start to mentally think about what's coming next. To reinforce your words, all done, by using the sign or showing the picture or both. That's about it for that one. Next slide.
I'm going to talk just very quickly about praise, and that praise may help your child. We want to find a way to fortify our children and to build them up. And so I'm thinking that if your child is feeling good about themselves, if they have a feeling of self-worth and satisfaction in themselves, if they feel confident, if they know what behaviors will be well received and what behaviors are desirable, and if they are independent, chances are that meltdowns and tantrums will be lessened, and possibly when they do happen, they will be less severe, and you will be better able to negotiate back to that calm, alert state. Next slide. So in order to use praise, we want to make sure that your praise is effective. You want to make the most of language opportunities. You're stacking the blocks. If you just say good job, you're missing that opportunity to talk about these things you're playing with are blocks, and what you're doing with them is stacking. So you're building their language learning. You want to pay attention to the behaviors you want to see. Ooh, I see how slow and careful you're being stacking those blocks. You want to be very specific. Oh, you're using lots of different colored blocks. You want to reward the effort. This is so very important. So many times things we try and do, they don't necessarily turn out the way we planned or the way we wanted to. But we want kids to be persistent. We want them to use problem-solving skills. So we want to acknowledge the effort put into it. I like the way you keep trying to build that tower. Even though it's falling down, you tried again. We want to give your child their full attention. Nothing is more reinforcing than your attention. So you can point that out. Ooh, I'm watching. And we also want to vary our praise doing a high five, a happy dance. Let's do, let's clap together. And again, all those kinds of things to vary your praise. And there are certainly lots of different ways that you can reinforce what your child is doing. Next slide.
Okay, also in your toolbox is a social story, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what is a social story? It is a short book made with pictures to depict a situation or to talk about an expected behavior. So social stories have pictures or photos with text, much like all of the other visuals we've talked about. They can be homemade or found online, again, like all the other visuals we've talked about. The homemade social stories allow for greater individualization in that you might have pictures of your child going through a certain situation, or you're talking about certain expected behavior. So let me actually go to the social story that's in the toolkit. So you could go to the next slide, Sarah. So for example, the social story that's in your toolkit is how to calm my body. And this is a generic social story, but you could make one specific to your child where you have your child's picture right there on the front instead of this generic little person. It states the concern. The concern is sometimes I get mad or sad. That's my concern. That's the parent's concern. And then this is just the front page of the social story. There are, I think, 12 pages in the social story where it talks about what I can do or what you can help your child do when they get mad or sad. And each idea is pictorially represented. So it can be things like, I can go to my quiet place, or I can squeeze my Play-Doh, or I can go in my swing, or I can put on my headphones and listen to calming music. So again, it's kind of like that poster that we talked about earlier about when I'm mad or angry. But this is more of a book form, and it's something that you would read ahead of time with your child so that when they get into a situation where they're feeling mad or sad, they can recall some of the information that you've talked about when you've read the story. So now I want to go back to the other slide, since now you know what a social story starts to look like. So again, they can be homemade or found online. So there's lots and lots of generic social stories from, I mean, Paula and I did a whole topic on social stories. So there's social stories on potty training, on how to get on an airplane, on visiting grandma and grandpa, on how to sit at the Thanksgiving dinner table, on going to church, riding in my, keeping my seatbelt on in my car, going to the doctors, losing a tooth. There's numbers and numbers of social stories. So feel free to look online and find something that works for you. And if you can't find something that works, then make your own social story with your own photos of your child and the situation about that. Social stories are usually used to teach self-care routines. So again, how to get dressed and how to brush my teeth and how to take care of my body, and how to teach social behaviors, how to play with my friends in the playground, how to act at a birthday party, those types of things. And a social story, when read ahead of time, can prepare your child for an upcoming situation, such as loud singing at a birthday party tends to be one that I hear about with the families that I'm working with. So the social story might be, I'm stating the concern, which is I get upset when people are singing too loudly, and it's the concern from the child's point of view. And then here's, 3 or 4 things that we can do to alleviate that problem. I can leave the room. And again, we're co-regulating with our adult parent or our caregiver. We can leave the room. We can wear headphones or earmuffs. I can cover my ears. I can go downstairs and play in the basement. So a social story identifies a concern or a problem and how we can work through that problem when it arises. Next slide. That's it. Yeah.
And just on behalf of Neysa and I, we're really glad that you joined us for our presentation, the Tantrum Tamer Toolbox. Say that 5 times fast. Hopefully you benefited and gained some useful information. Again, thank you.